A young man, raised by the state and haunted by a past he couldn't remember, inherited the one thing he thought he'd lost forever: his grandfather's abandoned ranch. But what he found buried there wasn't just about land or money. It was the devastating truth of why he was taken away, and a choice that would redefine his entire life. If you've ever felt lost and wondered if there was a place you truly belonged, hit that subscribe button and come on this journey with me. This story is for you. 19 years. That's how long it had been. 19 years of state-issued shoes, of caseworkers with tired eyes, of group homes that smelled of disinfectant and quiet desperation. 19 years of telling myself a story, that my grandfather, the only family I had left, hadn't been fit to raise me, that he was a drunk, or unstable, or simply didn't want a 6-year-old boy underfoot. It was a story the system gave me, and, over time, I had made it my own. It was a hard, sharp thing, but it was solid. It was something to hold on to. The day I turned 25, that story began to crumble. It started with a letter delivered to the halfway house where I was living, a place that marked the final transition from ward of the state to just a man. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, with the name of a law firm embossed in the corner: Abernathy and Sons. My hands, calloused from a string of temp jobs in construction and warehousing, felt clumsy holding something so formal. Inside, the language was dense and legalistic, but the core message was simple. My grandfather, William Thorne, had passed away 3 months prior. He had named me Leo Thorne as the sole heir to his estate. The estate consisted of one primary asset: the Thorne Ranch, a 160-acre property in a place called Juniper Creek, a town I only knew from the faded postmark on a single birthday card I'd received when I was 7. The letter went on to state that the property was encumbered by significant debt, back taxes, liens, penalties. It was, in the lawyer's careful phrasing, financially distressed. However, there was an interested party. A corporation named Horizon Development had made a standing offer to purchase the land, an offer that would clear all debts and leave me with a substantial sum, enough to change my life. All I had to do was sign the papers. They were enclosed. A bus ticket was also enclosed, one way, to a town near Juniper Creek. The letter concluded with a polite but firm request to meet the lawyer, a Mr. Elias Abernathy, at his office within the week to finalize the transaction. I sat on the edge of my cot, the papers spread out before me. The numbers on the offer from Horizon Development swam before my eyes. It was more money than I had ever imagined holding. It was a clean slate, a way out of the cycle of temporary addresses and uncertain futures. I could go anywhere, be anyone. I could finally leave the ghost of Leo Thorne, the foster kid, behind. But my eyes kept drifting back to the name of the property: Thorne Ranch. It felt like a phantom limb, a part of me that had been amputated so long ago I'd forgotten it was ever there. I didn't remember the ranch. I didn't remember my grandfather's face. All I had were fractured images, flashes of a wide-open sky, the smell of dust and pine, the rough feel of a denim jacket against my cheek. Were they even real memories, or just dreams cobbled together from things I wished were true? The system had told me he was unfit. They'd used words like neglect and endangerment. They said he couldn't provide a stable home, and for 19 years I had accepted it. It was easier than believing I had been abandoned for no reason at all. Now, this letter, this inheritance. It wasn't just a property, it was a question. Why would a man who didn't want me leave me the only thing he had? Why would he hold on to it for all these years, drowning in debt, only to pass it on to a grandson who was a stranger? The easy answer was that he couldn't sell it. that he died before he could, and I was just the legal default. But a deeper, quieter part of me, a part I hadn't listened to in years, whispered that it was more complicated than that. The decision should have been easy: sign the papers, take the money, start over. But my hand wouldn't pick up the pen. Instead, I folded the legal documents, put them in my worn backpack, and took the bus ticket. I had to see it. I had to stand on the land that shared my name, just once, before I signed it away forever. I had to know what I was leaving behind. The bus ride was a long, slow transition from one world to another. The gray concrete of the city gave way to sprawling suburbs, then to farmland, and finally to the high desert country of the West. The air that hissed through the window vents began to smell of sagebrush and dry earth. I watched the landscape change, feeling like I was traveling not just across miles, but through time. I was a ghost returning to a place I couldn't haunt because I couldn't remember it. When the bus finally sighed to a stop at a dusty crossroads with a single gas station and a diner, the driver called out, I was the only one who got off. The silence was the first thing that hit me. It wasn't the absence of noise, it was a presence. A low hum of wind, the distant cry of a hawk, the crunch of my own boots on the gravel shoulder of the road. The lawyer's instructions were clear. The ranch was 2 miles down the old highway. No one had lived there for years. The walk was a meditation. The sun was hot on my neck, and the sky was a piercing, endless blue. I passed rusted fences and fields of dry grass. There were no other cars, no other people, just me and the rhythmic sound of my own footsteps. Then I saw it, a break in the fence line and a cattle guard in the road. 2 massive wooden posts stood on either side of the entrance, and hanging between them, suspended by rusted chains, was a heavy wooden sign. The letters were faded, peeling, but still legible. Thorn Ranch. My breath caught in my throat. It was real. I had a place. I had a name. I stepped off the highway and onto the dirt drive, feeling a jolt, a strange sense of recognition that was more like a magnetic pull than a memory. The driveway was overgrown, a narrow track between towering weeds and stubborn sagebrush. It wound its way up a gentle rise, and as I reached the crest, the property came into view. And my heart sank. The lawyer had said it was distressed. That was a kind word. It was a ruin. The main house, a single-story ranch-style building, sagged in the middle, its porch roof tilting at a drunken angle. Paint was peeling off the siding in long, sun-bleached strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. Windows were boarded up, and the ones that weren't were dark and empty, like vacant eyes. To the left stood a large barn, its great doors hanging askew from their tracks, one of them lying half buried in the dirt. A corral beside it had collapsed, its wooden rails splintering into the ground. Everything was still, silent, baking under the afternoon sun. It looked like a place where things came to die. Hope. Dreams. Families. This wasn't a home, it was a tombstone. The story the system told me suddenly felt very, very true. He couldn't take care of a place, so how could he have taken care of a child? A wave of bitterness washed over me. He'd left me this, a monument to his own failure, a burden of debt and decay. The money from Horizon Development felt less like a windfall and more like an escape. I would walk through it, I told myself, just to say I had. Then I would call the lawyer and tell him to send the papers. I would sign them without a second thought. I walked toward the house, my boots kicking up clouds of fine, pale dust. On the porch, a weathered rocking chair sat beside the front door, coated in a thick layer of grime. It was tilted to one side, one of its rockers broken. I wondered if he had sat there, in the evenings, looking out over the land. I wondered if he ever thought of me. The lawyer had included a small, tarnished brass key in the envelope. It looked ancient. I slid it into the lock on the front door. For a moment, it resisted, the mechanism frozen with rust and disuse. I put my shoulder into it, turned the key hard, and with a loud, groaning crack, the lock gave way. The door swung inward into darkness, releasing a wave of stale, musty air. It was the smell of trapped time, of dust and decay and forgotten things. I hesitated on the threshold, my heart pounding in my chest. This was it, the place where my life began, and where it had, in a way, ended. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside. The interior was a landscape of shadows and dust. Sunlight struggled through the grimy windows, cutting sharp, hazy beams through the air, illuminating dancing motes of dust. Everything was covered in a pale gray shroud. Furniture huddled in the center of the living room, draped in yellowed sheets, their shapes like sleeping, shrouded giants. I pulled one off, revealing a worn leather armchair with deep cracks in its surface. I could almost see the imprint of a man who had sat there for thousands of hours. The silence in the house was different from the silence outside. It was heavier, weighted with the absence of voices, of footsteps, of life. I walked slowly through the rooms, my boots echoing on the wooden floors. The kitchen was small, with peeling linoleum and a cast-iron stove that looked like a relic from another century. In the sink, a single cup sat coated in a century of dust. It was an image of a life interrupted, of someone walking away mid-motion. I found the bedroom at the end of a short hallway. It was simple. A metal frame bed, stripped to the mattress, a tall, dark wood wardrobe, and a small, sturdy-looking desk pushed up against the far wall. This room felt different. It felt more personal. This was his space. I ran my hand over the desk's surface, leaving a clean streak in the thick dust. The wood was solid oak, scarred and worn. There were 3 drawers. The top 2 were unlocked. Inside, I found mundane things: old receipts, dried-up pens, a few loose bullets, a tattered farmer's almanac. But the bottom drawer, the largest one, was locked. I jiggled the handle, but it was solid. There was no key on the ring Mr. Abernathy had given me. A surge of frustration and something else, a desperate, aching curiosity, welled up in me. What was in there? Why was this one drawer locked when the rest of the house was left open to time and decay? It felt important. It felt like the first real question in a house full of ghosts. I spent the next hour searching for a key. I looked in every other drawer, in the pockets of an old coat hanging in the wardrobe, under the mattress. Nothing. The sun was beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. The house was growing colder. The temptation to give up, to walk away and just take the money, was immense. This place was a wreck. It was filled with a sadness so profound I could feel it in my bones. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. That locked drawer felt like a challenge, a final piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was supposed to solve. My eyes scanned the room again, and this time they landed on a small, framed photograph on the wall above the desk. It was the only personal item left on display. I took it down. It was a picture of a much younger man, presumably my grandfather, squinting into the sun. He was lean and weathered, with kind eyes and a strong jaw. He was holding a small boy on his shoulders. The boy was laughing, his face a blur of pure joy. It was me. A lump formed in my throat. I had never seen a picture of us together. I had never seen a picture of myself as a happy child. I stared at it, tracing the outline of my grandfather's face with my thumb. He didn't look like an unfit man. He looked like a father. He looked like home. I turned the frame over in my hands. The backing was held in place by small metal tabs. On a whim, I pried them open with my thumbnail. The cardboard backing came loose, and something small and flat fell out into my palm. It was another key, smaller and more intricate than the one for the front door. My heart hammered against my ribs. I walked back to the desk, my hand trembling slightly as I inserted the key into the lock of the bottom drawer. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I pulled the drawer open. It didn't contain papers or valuables. It contained a single object, a heavy, gray, metal box, the kind used for documents or ammunition. It was old and dented, with a simple latch on the front. It wasn't locked. With a sense of both dread and reverence, I lifted it out and placed it on the dusty desktop. I unhooked the latch and slowly, carefully, lifted the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, was a stack of envelopes, tied together with a faded piece of twine. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope with my name, Leo, written on it in a strong, slightly shaky hand. My breath hitched. This was it. This was the answer. This was either the confirmation of the story I'd always been told, or it was its complete destruction. I untied the twine, my fingers feeling thick and clumsy. I picked up the top envelope. The paper was dry and brittle, and the ink had faded slightly, but the words were clear. I opened it and unfolded the letter inside. It was dated just a few weeks after I was taken away. It began. My hands were shaking so hard I had to set the letter down on the desk for a moment. I took a ragged breath and read on. I had to stop reading. A sob tore its way out of my chest, a raw, painful sound that echoed in the silent house. It was a sound of 19 years of buried grief, of a loneliness so deep I had forgotten what it felt like to not be lonely. I cried for the little boy who believed he wasn't wanted. I cried for the old man who had lost everything. I put my head in my hands and wept, the dust of the desk mixing with the salt of my tears. He had fought for me. He had loved me. The entire foundation of my life, the hard, sharp story I had carried for so long, had just been shattered into a million pieces. And in its place was a truth so painful and so beautiful it was almost unbearable. I wasn't abandoned. I was stolen. After a long time, my sobs subsided into shuddering breaths. I picked up the letter again, my vision blurry. Quote 4. The letter continued. Quote 5. I read the letter 3 times, the words burning themselves into my memory. The grief was still there, a heavy weight in my chest, but now something else was mixing with it. Anger. A cold, hard rage began to smolder deep inside me. They had taken my life. They had lied to me, lied about him. They had profited from our pain. Horizon Development. I said the name out loud, and it tasted like poison. The generous offer wasn't a kindness, it was the final insult. They wanted to buy my silence, to purchase the scene of their crime and bulldoze it into oblivion. The choice he wrote about didn't feel like a choice at all. It felt like a calling. It felt like the first real purpose I had ever had. I folded the letter, placed it carefully back in the box, and stood up. The sun had set, and the room was filled with the deep blue of twilight. I looked out the dirty window toward the dark, hulking shape of the barn. Our fight begins there. You know, it's a strange thing, having the entire narrative of your life rewritten in the space of 10 minutes. For 19 years, I was the boy who was saved from a bad situation. I was the lucky one, given a chance by the system. That story, as painful as it was, gave me a place in the world. It made sense of the chaos. Now, I was the boy who was stolen, whose grandfather was framed, whose entire life was collateral damage in a corporate land grab. It was a story of injustice, of a deep and profound wrongness, and it's terrifying, standing in the wreckage of your own history, not knowing who you are anymore. Have you ever felt that? Have you ever had a moment where you realized everything you believed to be true was a lie? It feels like falling, like the ground has just disappeared from beneath your feet. If you're out there and you know that feeling, I just want you to know you're not alone. Stick with me because what I found next, well, it changed everything all over again. Now, let's get back to that barn. The walk from the house to the barn was maybe 100 yards, but it felt like a mile. The air had grown cold, and a sliver of a moon was rising, casting a pale, ghostly light over the property. The barn loomed larger as I approached, a dark cathedral of secrets. The one door still on its track was jammed shut. I had to squeeze through the gap left by the one that had fallen. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of old hay, rotting wood, and dry earth. It was cavernous, and the moonlight streaming through the gaps in the roof created a patchwork of light and shadow on the dirt floor. My eyes slowly adjusted to the gloom. I could see the outlines of old stalls, a rusted-out tractor sitting in the corner like a sleeping iron beast, and piles of decaying equipment. My grandfather's letter had been specific. I scanned the interior, and there, against the far wall, was a long, heavy workbench. It was cluttered with old tools, jars of nails and screws, and thick cobwebs that hung like funeral shrouds. As I got closer, my heart began to pound. This was it. This was the place he had pointed me to. I ran my hands over the surface of the bench. It was scarred with saw marks and oil stains, a testament to a lifetime of hard work. I imagined him standing here, his hands, calloused like mine, carefully mending a broken wheel on a toy truck. The memory wasn't real, but it felt true. I knelt on the hard-packed dirt floor and looked underneath. It was dark, filled with shadows and debris. I used the flashlight on my phone, its bright, cold beam cutting through the darkness. I saw old paint cans, a stack of rotting burlap sacks, and a tangle of rusted wire. I started pulling things out, my hands getting covered in grime and spider webs. The work was slow, methodical. I felt like an archaeologist excavating my own past. After clearing the space, I was left with the bare dirt floor. I ran my hand over the surface, feeling for any irregularity. Nothing. My hope began to falter. Had I misunderstood? Had time and decay erased whatever he had left for me? I thought back to his words. Look under the workbench, not just under it, but the floor itself. I started tapping the ground, listening for a change in sound. Thud, thud, thud. It was all solid, packed earth. I was about to give up when my fingers brushed against something hard and straight, just under the surface of the loose dirt. I dug at it with my fingertips, my excitement surging back. It was the edge of a wooden plank. I cleared the dirt away frantically, revealing the outline of a single, wide floorboard that wasn't quite like the others around it. It didn't seem to be nailed down. I found a small notch on one end, just big enough to get my fingers into. I pulled. It was heavy, but it lifted. With a soft, scraping sound, the floorboard came free, revealing a dark, rectangular hole in the ground. My phone's light pierced the darkness, and I saw it. It wasn't a hole, it was a small brick-lined compartment, and inside that compartment sat another metal box, this one much larger and heavier than the first. It was an old military-style footlocker, painted olive drab, with heavy-duty latches on the front. It took all my strength to haul it out of the hole and drag it into the center of the barn floor. This was his real legacy. This was the weapon he had left me. I knelt before it, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. My fingers fumbled with the latches. They were stiff, but they opened with a loud clang that echoed through the vast, silent space. I took a deep breath and lifted the heavy lid. The contents were packed tightly, meticulously organized. This was not a random collection of keepsakes. This was an archive, a case file. On the very top was another letter, this one much shorter. Leo, it read. If you found this, it means you chose to fight. I am proud of you. Inside this box is everything you need. The lies they told, the people they paid, the pressure they applied. It's all here. Don't trust anyone named Caldwell. Don't trust Horizon Development. And be careful with the local sheriff's office. They are all connected. The only person in town you might be able to trust is Elias Abernathy. His father was my lawyer, and he was a good man. I hope the son is the same. I have included something to help you with the immediate problem of the back taxes. It is not much, but it is everything I could save. It should be enough to stop the foreclosure and buy you time. The rest is up to you. This is your land, son. Fight for it. All my love, Gramps. My mind reeled. Caldwell, Horizon Development, the sheriff. It was a conspiracy, just like he'd said. And Mr. Abernathy, the lawyer who had sent me the buyout offer. Was he trustworthy, or was he part of it? My grandfather's words offered a seed of hope, but I knew I had to be cautious. Beneath the letter was a thick, leather-bound journal. I opened it. It was my grandfather's handwriting, page after page of it, dated from the day I was taken away until just a few years before his death. It was a record of his life, his loneliness, his struggle to keep the ranch afloat. But it was more than that. It was an investigation. He documented every phone call, every piece of junk mail, every subtle threat from people connected to Horizon. He wrote down names, dates, and license plate numbers of unfamiliar trucks that would park on the highway, watching the house. He described his attempts to get legal help, only to be turned away by lawyers who suddenly became unavailable once they heard the name Caldwell. It was a meticulous, heartbreaking chronicle of a quiet, desperate war. Deeper in the box, I found a folder of documents. There was a sworn, notarized affidavit from an old ranch hand who had worked for my grandfather. He testified that he was with my grandfather the entire day they claimed I was left alone, and that my grandfather never touched a drop of alcohol. He stated that he was later threatened by a man working for a Mr. Caldwell and told to keep his mouth shut, or his own family would be in danger. There were copies of old property records, showing that the Caldwell family had been trying to acquire the surrounding ranches for generations, using predatory tactics to force people out. And there were newspaper clippings about Horizon Development's plans for a luxury resort and golf course in the valley, a project that had been stalled for years because they couldn't acquire the final central piece of land, the Thorn Ranch. It was all there, a clear, damning trail of evidence that laid out the entire scheme. They hadn't just framed him, they had systematically isolated and terrorized him for 2 decades. Finally, at the very bottom of the chest, wrapped in oilcloth, was a thick stack of cash. I counted it. It was just over $30,000. I remembered the figure for the back taxes from Mr. Abernathy's letter. It was almost the exact amount. A wave of emotion, so strong it almost knocked the wind out of me, washed over me. This money represented 20 years of sacrifice, 20 years of him living on the bare minimum, saving every spare dollar, not to enrich himself, but to give me a fighting chance. He had lived in poverty in a decaying house, not because he had failed, but because he was funding a war he knew he wouldn't live to see the end of. He was arming his heir. He was arming me. I sat there on the dirt floor of the barn, surrounded by the proof of my grandfather's love and the evidence of his enemy's greed, and I felt the last traces of the lost, aimless boy I had been just that morning burn away. In his place was a man with a name, a history, and a mission. I was Leo Thorne. This was my land, and I was not going to sell. The next morning, I woke up on the dusty floor of the barn, stiff and cold, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in my entire life. I had slept with the footlocker beside me, as if guarding it. The first light of dawn was filtering through the cracks in the walls, striping the darkness. I packed the journal and the most critical documents into my backpack, re-hid the footlocker and the cash under the floorboard, and walked back to the house. The place didn't look like a ruin to me anymore. It looked like a fortress. It looked like a home that was waiting to be reclaimed. I spent the morning doing a more thorough inventory of the house. I found canned goods in the pantry, old but likely still edible. I found a hand-crank pump for the well out back, and after a half-hour of grueling work, I managed to draw up clear, cold water. The house had bones. The ranch had life in it still. It wasn't dead. It had just been sleeping. Late in the morning, my phone, which I'd been carefully conserving battery on, rang. It was an unknown number with a local area code. I answered, my heart thudding. A calm, professional voice asked. I took a breath, clutching the phone tightly. This was the moment. My grandfather's letter had said Abernathy's father was a good man, and he hoped the son was the same. It was a gamble, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Quote, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. The silence stretched, and I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my stomach. Had I made a mistake? Was he part of it? Quote 14, Abernathy finally said, his tone shifting from polite business to something more cautious, more intrigued. Quote 15, relief washed over me. So potent, I almost sagged against the wall. He wasn't one of them. He was an ally. I'm at the ranch now, I said. Can you come out here? Another pause. That's not advisable, he said slowly. The folks from Horizon and their associates, they keep an eye on that property. They're waiting for you to give up and leave. If they see a lawyer show up, especially me, they'll know something's changed. It's better if you come into town. My office is discreet. Can you get here? I told him I could. We set a time for late that afternoon. Before hanging up, he added one more thing, his voice low and serious. Leo, be careful. These are not pleasant people. The man you need to know about is named Marcus Caldwell. He runs Horizon's regional acquisitions. His family has been a shadow over this valley for a long time. Don't talk to anyone. Just come straight to my office. The 2-mile walk back to the highway felt entirely different. This time, I wasn't an aimless ghost. I was a soldier on a mission. Every passing truck made me tense, wondering if I was being watched. I got a ride into the small town of Juniper Creek from a trucker at the gas station. The town itself was quaint, a main street with a handful of storefronts that looked like they hadn't changed much in 50 years. Abernathy's office was on the second floor of an old brick building above a hardware store. The sign on the door was simple: Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law. Estimated 1958. I walked in, and a middle-aged man with thinning gray hair and kind, intelligent eyes looked up from his desk. He was wearing a slightly rumpled suit, and his office was overflowing with books and files. "Shoten," he said, standing and extending a hand. "Kotu." His handshake was firm. I immediately felt I could trust him. I sat down, pulled the journal and the folder of documents from my backpack and laid them on his desk. I said simply, for the next 2 hours we went through everything. I watched his expression change from professional curiosity to shock, then to a quiet, simmering anger. He read the ranch hand's affidavit, his jaw tightening. He scanned the pages of my grandfather's journal, occasionally shaking his head in disbelief. He whispered, more to himself than to me. Quote, "Shah." He looked at me. His eyes filled with a new respect. Quote. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling on him. Quote, "Shantan." I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Quote, "Yanta." Quote, "Sant." Abernathy said, a strategic glint in his eye. Quote 30. He paused, looking at me intently. Quote 31. He explained the strategy. We would pay the back taxes immediately, using the cash my grandfather had left. This would remove the threat of foreclosure and put the property securely in my name. Then, he would arrange a meeting with Horizon's lawyers. He would present them with a copy of our evidence and give them a choice. Either they could drop all claims to the land, pay a substantial settlement for the decades of harassment and the conspiracy that stole my childhood, and walk away forever, or we would release everything to the state news outlets and file the lawsuit. They're a publicly traded company, Abernathy explained. The last thing they want is a massive scandal about their business practices, especially ones that involve framing an old man to steal his land and orphan his grandson. The bad press could cost them millions, far more than this resort is worth. They might just cut their losses to make it all go away. It was a brilliant, aggressive plan. It was a way to use their own ruthless pragmatism against them. But it was still a risk. They could call our bluff. They could try to bury us in legal fees. Abernathy then brought up the initial offer from Horizon. There is a third option, Leo, the one they want you to take. We could still use this evidence to negotiate a much, much higher price for the ranch. You could walk away with millions, enough to live comfortably for the rest of your life. No one would blame you. He was testing me. He was repeating my grandfather's words, giving me the same choice. Sell and be free or stay and fight. I looked out his office window at the small town, at the distant line of mesas on the horizon. I thought of the sagging porch on the old house. I thought of the dusty leather armchair. I thought of the photograph of a laughing little boy on his grandfather's shoulders. That boy had his home stolen from him. That man had his son stolen from him. They had paid for it with 19 years of separation, 19 years of pain. Millions of dollars couldn't buy that back. But saving the ranch, rebuilding it, making it a home again, that felt like a kind of justice. It felt like a way to honor the man who had sacrificed everything for me. I said, my voice firm. A slow smile spread across Elias Abernathy's face. I was hoping you'd say that, he said. Your grandfather would be proud. Okay, Leo Thorne, let's go to war. The weeks that followed were a blur of activity. The first thing we did was take my grandfather's cash to the county tax office. I'll never forget the look on the clerk's face as I paid the entire $30,000 delinquency in cash. Just like that, the biggest threat, the foreclosure, was gone. The ranch was mine, free and clear for the moment. While Abernathy prepared the legal case and reached out to Horizon's counsel, my war was fought on a different front. I moved into the ranch. I didn't have a car, so I bought supplies in town and hauled them back on a rusty old bicycle I found in the barn. I slept on the floor in a sleeping bag, but it felt more like home than any bed I'd ever had. My days were spent on labor. Hard, back-breaking, soul-cleansing labor. I started with the house. I tore down the boards from the windows, letting the sunlight flood in for the first time in years. I scrubbed every surface, clearing away the shrouds of dust, revealing the warm wood floors and solid craftsmanship beneath. I repaired the broken rocking chair on the porch, sanding it down and giving it a new coat of varnish. Every evening, I would sit in it, just as I imagined he had, and watch the sunset paint the sky in fiery colors. I moved on to the land itself. I fixed the corral fence, post by post. I cleared the overgrown driveway. I hauled junk and debris out of the barn. With every task I completed, I felt like I was not just restoring a property, but restoring a part of myself. I was reclaiming the years that had been stolen. I was putting down roots in the only soil that had ever been mine. The work was lonely, but I didn't feel alone. I felt my grandfather's presence everywhere. In the way a door was hung, in the solid construction of the workbench, in the shade of the single massive cottonwood tree by the well. I would read a few pages from his journal every night, learning more about the man he was, his quiet dignity, his stubborn resilience, his unshakable love for me. He was no longer a ghost. He was my mentor, my guide, my family. About a month after my meeting with Abernathy, he called me. "They want to meet," he said. "Horizon's lawyers, and Marcus Caldwell will be there himself. They're not happy, Leo. They're trying to project strength, but the fact they're meeting at all means they're worried. It's time." The meeting took place in a sterile conference room in a city 2 hours away. It was a world away from the ranch. Marcus Caldwell was exactly what I expected. Handsome, expensively dressed, with the easy, predatory confidence of a man who had never been told no. He and his 2 lawyers sat across a polished mahogany table from Abernathy and me. I was wearing clean jeans and a work shirt, my hands still rough from my labor. I felt out of place, but I wasn't intimidated. I had the truth on my side. Caldwell started by renewing their offer, doubling the original amount. He spoke of it as a gesture of goodwill, a way to help a young man get a fresh start. He never once made eye contact with me. I let Abernathy do the talking. My lawyer calmly laid out our terms. They would cede any and all claims to the Thorn Ranch. They would issue a private, written apology. And they would pay a settlement, not for the land, but as punitive damages for the conspiracy and harassment. The amount he named was significant, enough to secure the ranch's future for years to come. One of Caldwell's lawyers laughed. Quote 41, he said. Quote 42. That's when Abernathy slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a copy of the ranch hand's sworn affidavit. He followed it with a few selected, transcribed pages from my grandfather's journal, detailing Caldwell's personal involvement in the threats. I watched Caldwell's face as he read them. The confident smirk faltered. A flicker of something, fear, anger, passed through his eyes. He knew we had him. The meeting ended shortly after that. They said they would consider our proposal. For 2 weeks, we heard nothing. It was the hardest part of the whole ordeal, the waiting, the uncertainty. I kept working on the ranch, trying to pour my anxiety into the physical labor. I repaired the barn roof. I started a small vegetable garden. I was building a life, not knowing if it would be snatched away again. Then, one evening, as I was sitting on the porch, watching the stars come out in the vast, clear sky, Abernathy's car pulled up the driveway. I had never seen him at the ranch before. My stomach clenched. He got out of the car, holding a briefcase, and walked up to the porch. He didn't say anything for a moment, just looked around at the work I had done. The repaired fences, the clean windows, the light shining from inside the house. "Your grandfather would love what you've done with the place," he said quietly. Then he opened his briefcase and pulled out a document. "They folded," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "They agreed to every one of our terms. It's over, Leo. You won." He handed me a cashier's check for the settlement amount. It was more than enough to fix everything that was broken, to buy stock, to make the Thorn Ranch a working ranch again. He also handed me a letter on Horizon Development's letterhead, signed by Marcus Caldwell. It was a stilted, legally phrased apology, but it was an admission of guilt. It was victory. I took the papers, my hands numb. I looked from the check to the house to the land stretching out in the moonlight. I had done it. We had done it. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel like celebrating. I just felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet, solid feeling of rightness. The war was over. I was home. It's been a year since that day. The ranch is no longer a ruin. It's a home. With the settlement money, I was able to hire a few local guys to help me restore the house properly, to run new plumbing and electricity. We rebuilt the barn, and this spring, I bought my first 20 head of cattle. The work is hard, the days are long, but I have never felt more alive. Elias Abernathy has become a good friend. He comes out for dinner sometimes, and we sit on the porch in the 2 rocking chairs, the one I fixed, and a new one I bought to go with it. We talk about the law, about the town, about my grandfather. I've learned that inheritance isn't about money or property. It's about the stories we carry and the values we choose to fight for. My grandfather didn't leave me a piece of land. He left me a legacy of resilience. He left me a reason to become the man I was always meant to be. He taught me that home isn't a place you're given. It's a place you build, a place you defend. The scars of those 19 years will probably never fade completely. There's a part of me that will always be that lost kid, but now he has a place to rest. He has a home. And that brings me to you. So many of us have stories that were given to us by others. Stories about who we are, where we come from, and what we're capable of. We're told we're not good enough, not wanted, not strong enough to fight. This journey taught me that we have the power to reject those stories and write our own. We can find the truth, even if it's buried under decades of lies and dust. So I want to ask you, what is the inheritance you're fighting for? It doesn't have to be land. It can be a family connection, a personal truth, your own self-respect. Let me know in the comments below. Your stories matter. This community is a place for people who understand that the hardest fights are the ones that lead us back to ourselves. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe and join us, because we all deserve a place to call home.